The horror in a lot of the stories I read start with a small creeping sense of unease. Well, sometimes the real creeping dread comes from something we ignore: our health, like a nagging ache, a weird symptom, or just the stress of keeping up with everything. I recently found myself putting off a doctor's visit with the usual excuse that maybe it'll go away and I'll wait till tomorrow to call. That's where ZocDoc swooped in and made things simple. It's a free website where you can search and compare in-network doctors, filter by specialty, check actual appointment openings, and book instantly, often within 24 to 72 hours. You can look at verified patient reviews, read doctor profiles, and pick someone who feels like the right fit for you. No long phone calls or guessing games. For me, I was able to pick a doctor who literally had availability the next day and whose reviews mentioned patients feeling heard. That was important because when you walk into an appointment, you want someone who gets you, not someone you can't connect with. So if you've been putting off seeing a doctor, feeling unsure of where to start, or just want someone you feel good about walking into their office or video call, go check out ZocDoc.com/MR.SHADOW night and find a doctor that fits you. This happened to me on Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago. The reason I remember it was Thanksgiving Day was because I was sick with a respiratory virus that was going around at the time. On Thanksgiving, I was past the fever and contagious part. I just had body chills and could not go 5 seconds without coughing, and I could barely speak. At the time, I had promised a friend/sea coworker who would be out of town for the holidays that I would watch her cat, as her cat is older and needs medicine every day. I agreed since she lives a short walk away from where we work. I agreed before I got sick, but I couldn't go back on my promise. I was also talking to a friend about how both of us wanted to go play tennis and bowling at some point since we both played in high school. I had kept my tennis rackets and bowling ball at my father's place since the dorm I lived in was extremely small. I live in a big city to go to college and therefore did not have a car, as I used public transportation to get around. Because I was sick during Thanksgiving, I was unable to get back to my father's place for Thanksgiving. But I was extremely determined to get my tennis rackets and bowling balls since I only go back to my father's place a couple times a year. So if I didn't get my things on Thanksgiving, it would be another few months before we could play. And so I was stubborn and dead set on getting my things. I had made a plan in my head. I would walk to the light rail and get off on a station closer to where my father lives. Then ask my brother to come and bring me the stuff that I wanted. On the way home, I would get off the light rail and take the bus to my friend's place to check in on her cat and make sure she was taking her medicine. The transit system where I live is still very irregular. As I was waiting for the bus to come and take me to my friend's place on Apple Maps, my phone would keep saying that the bus was 1 minute away just for it to not show up. And then I'd refresh it, and it would say the next bus comes in 15 minutes. I would have just walked to her place, and she lives not too far from the light rail station. But for context, at the time I was a 19-year-old female about 53, and I was carrying a 13-lb bowling ball, a couple tennis rackets, and some Thanksgiving leftovers along with being sick. I had been waiting for over 30 minutes for the bus to come. And since it was about 9:00 p.m. on Thanksgiving, the bus stop was empty and I was the only one there. As I was waiting, a car pulled up with a group of men who looked like they were in their early to mid-20s. They were speaking another language and laughing. I assumed they were just friends dropping someone off at the station. After a few minutes, one of the men got out and the car drove off. The station was pretty big, and I stood a little away from the actual bus stop since I was coughing a lot and didn't want to be near anyone. Despite that, the man walked over and sat on the bench directly next to me. I didn't think much of it at first. I just stared at my phone, watching the bus arrival time constantly change, and kept leaning out to look down the street for the bus headlights. A couple minutes passed, and then I suddenly felt something on my shoulder. The man had gotten up and wrapped his arm tightly around me. My mind went completely blank. I was so confused and startled that I just froze up. After a moment, he mumbled something like asking if I was okay. I quietly said that I was fine and just waiting for the bus. A couple minutes later, he let go and sat back down. Red flags were going off, but I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe he heard me coughing and thought I didn't feel well. Or maybe he saw me leaning out to look for the bus and thought something was wrong. I knew those excuses were stupid, but I was trying to keep myself calm. People might be wondering why I didn't run or yell, but this man was well over 6 feet tall and easily twice my weight. He was also wearing one of those bandana-style face coverings. It was odd, but this was near the end of CO, so some people still wore them, and we were completely alone at the bus stop. I didn't want to provoke him. A few minutes later, he got up again and put his arm around me a second time, sometimes even stroking my back. Luckily, I was wearing a thick puffer jacket. I saw my bus approaching and just stayed still, thinking everything would be over once I got on. When the bus got close, I slipped out of his grip and quietly said something like, "My bus is here." He said something in response that made it clear he planned to follow me onto the bus. I know I should have told the driver, but I could barely talk without coughing, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before, so I was panicking. When I got on the bus, I stood up on purpose. Because of his size, I knew he'd have to sit, and if I sat first, he would sit next to me. Once he wasn't looming over me, I messaged a friend and tried to figure out what to do. I considered calling the police, but knew he would hear me, and I didn't know if he had a weapon. While I was stuck under his grip earlier, I was already planning what to do if he followed me. I knew I couldn't go to my friend's place. I also couldn't shake the thought that the group of men who dropped him off might be involved in something with him. The stop before my friend's place was the stop for work. I worked at a restaurant inside a large outdoor shopping center. It was around 9:30 p.m. Even though all the stores closed at 9:00, I knew the entire center had security and cameras everywhere. I also knew my co-workers would still be there finishing closing duties. The only downside was the locked front door, but the back employee entrance would be open. To get in through the back, I'd need to go through the outdoor trash room enclosure first, then punch in the code on the door. When the bus reached my stop, the man got off right with me and immediately grabbed my shoulder again, gripping even tighter. I had to take tiny steps. I didn't want to suddenly sprint and alert him if I wasn't close enough to make it inside in time. As we got closer to work, all I could think about was whether I'd be fast enough to break away and get through both doors before he caught me. Thankfully, when he approached the back entrance, the door to the trash enclosure was propped open, and one of the chefs and a coworker were standing there talking with the back door held open. I used that moment. His grip had released just slightly from walking, and I slipped out of it and ran past him. I tried to tell my coworker that a man was following me and to shut the door. Even though I could barely talk, he closed it right away. Not even 2 seconds later, the handle started rattling violently, and he started banging on the door. I explained as best I could that I didn't know him and that he followed me from the bus stop. We called mall security. While we waited, we could see the man pacing around the restaurant through the windows. After a couple of minutes, he walked into the ice cream shop directly across from us. Security arrived and asked me a few questions. The coworker who had been at the door ended up driving me to my friend's place so I could check on her cat, and then she drove me home. A few days later, my manager told me that mall security wanted to know if I wanted to press charges. I said I wasn't sure yet, and that I mostly wanted to know the man's name and what he claimed he was doing there. But my manager never followed up, and I never heard anything again. To this day, I have no idea what that man wanted, though I definitely have my suspicions. I honestly forgot about the whole thing until recently, when my same friend asked me again if I could watch her cat for Thanksgiving. That's what brought all of this back. This happened in early December 2 years ago, when I drove up into the mountains to visit an old friend I had not seen in a long time. His fictional name for the story is Scott, and my real name is Jeremy. We had been friends since middle school, but after graduation he moved out to a small mountain town with his family. Over the years we slowly drifted apart. I stayed in New York City for work and he stayed up in the mountains. We never fought or anything. We just stopped keeping up with each other's lives. So when he reached out to me out of nowhere and said I should come visit for a weekend, it made me feel kind of nostalgic and excited. He said it was the best time to come up because the snow added to the rustic rural vibe. I figured it would be fun to catch up. The drive up the mountain was extra long because I drove a bit slower due to icy conditions. There were barely any other cars on the road, and the sun went down around 400 p.m. since it was December, and by the time I reached the area where he was living, it was already pitch black. He lived in one of those older wooden houses on the side of the mountain. There were only a few scattered houses nearby, all spaced out far from each other. He lives in a good area for skiing. If only I could ski. When I pulled into his driveway and he came outside to greet me, the first thing I noticed was that something about him felt off or just different. I hadn't seen him in years, so I figured maybe I just forgot what he looked like and acted like. But the way he talked was different, slower than he used to talk. And he kept pausing between sentences like he forgot what he was saying. He helped carry my bag inside, and the inside of the house was warm but pretty empty. Not much furniture except for a couch, a table, a couple chairs, and some antique-looking wall decor. He told me I could sleep on the couch for the weekend since it folded into a pull-out bed. I told him that was fine. The house had a long, dark hallway across from the couch that led to a bathroom and 2 empty guest rooms, which he explained were empty because this used to be his grandparents' house, and they recently passed away. He told me he lived alone here now. The hallway had no light at the end, and the doors were all open, so from the couch, all I could see was this pitch-black rectangle stretching into the back of the house. For some reason, it made me uncomfortable, even though there was nothing obviously scary about it. That first night, we talked a little bit about old times, but it felt strange. His general demeanor and mannerisms were more socially awkward now, but I chalked it up to the fact that living alone in the mountains for years could make anyone a bit weird. He barely made eye contact, and I did feel like he kept looking in the direction of the hallway. When it was time to sleep, he went upstairs to his bedroom and I got the couch set up. I left a light near the hallway on because the dark made me nervous. I felt stupid about it, but the hallway really bothered me. I fell asleep, but at around 2:00 in the morning, I woke up to a thumping sound from upstairs. I quickly realized there were fast footsteps running across the floor above me. It sounded like someone sprinting from one end of the room to the other, then stopping and then sprinting again. The footsteps went on for about 20 seconds before just stopping completely. I waited to hear a door open or close or anything, but there was complete silence after that. I eventually fell back asleep, even though I was pretty creeped out after that. The second day was even weirder. Scott acted distracted the entire day, barely talking, barely eating, and whenever I asked if he was feeling okay, he would just nod without saying anything. I didn't understand why he was acting this way, being that he invited me here for the weekend for what I assumed was to catch up and rekindle our friendship. I also counted him going down that hallway at least 5 times throughout the day, and I never bothered to check what he was looking at. Since there was a bathroom at the end of the hall, I just presumed he was going in there, even though I never heard a flush. That night, the weather got worse and a snowstorm rolled through. Wind slammed against the house hard enough to make the walls shake a little. It was awesome. Honestly, I love the vibe of being snowed in a cozy place. I went to the couch and scrolled on my phone for like an hour, then went to sleep. Around 2:00 in the morning, I woke up again. This time I heard soft scraping sounds. They were coming from downstairs somewhere in the hallway. It sounded like something dragging across the wooden floor. Then it just stopped. But then there was a sudden tap on the wall behind me, like someone had flicked it with their finger. I turned and looked down the hallway. I didn't leave that light on that night, so it was completely dark. I didn't want to get up. I did my best to just roll to the other side and block the noises out. Old house, I kept telling myself. I did fall back asleep, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. The third night was the worst. By this time, I felt uneasy in the house in general, and I kept catching Scott staring at me for too long without saying anything, like he was checking if I noticed something. I almost thought about leaving early, but the snowstorm was supposed to last until morning. After dinner, Scott went upstairs early, and I stayed up on my phone, starting to question the point of this visit entirely. Eventually, I set up the couch and laid down. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but sometime around 2:00 in the morning again, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, but the rest of my body refused to move. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it. It was like being awake inside a dead body. I could only move my eyes. I couldn't even move my fingers. I started to panic, but then something made it even worse. I noticed movement at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was so dark that I couldn't tell if it was real or not. But after a few seconds, I realized what I was seeing. Scott was standing at the very end of the hallway. I could only see his outline because his face was completely hidden in the darkness. His arms hung at his sides, and he was standing perfectly still, like he'd been there for a long time just watching me. It was like a scene from Paranormal Activity. I tried to speak to him, but no sound came out. I tried to move or twitch or anything, but my body stayed frozen. I didn't even feel like I was breathing, to be honest. I could only stare. He stood there for what felt like an entire minute, not moving at all. Then, without warning, he slowly turned to his right and walked into the guest room at the end of the hall. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. My body slowly started to regain control. First my fingers, then my arms, then my ability to sit up. Once I fully snapped out of it, I sat up shaking and sweating. I kept telling myself it might have just been a dream or a hallucination, since sleep paralysis can cause that. But something in my gut said it wasn't. I whispered his name to see if he would answer. Nothing. Against everything in me, I got up and forced myself to walk down the hallway toward the room he had gone into. When I stepped inside, the room looked empty, but in the far corner by the window, someone was standing. I could see the shape of a person facing the window looking outside. I couldn't tell if it was Scott. Either way, the sight was horrifying. I slowly backed out and then ran upstairs to his bedroom. I found Scott asleep in his bed, completely knocked out. I shook him awake, and he looked confused and irritated, like he had no idea why I was waking him up. When I tried to tell him what I saw, he refused to go downstairs. I begged him to believe me that someone else was in the house. He would not even look toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, but his expression changed in a way that scared me even more. He looked like he already knew what I had seen. I then asked him firmly, "Scott, who is that downstairs?" and he just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. At that point, I decided I was done. I didn't care about the snow or the time. I ran downstairs and grabbed my bag to pack my stuff. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see that person standing there again. Genuinely, I just wanted to teleport out of that house immediately. When I got outside, the cold air almost relieved me. I brushed snow off my car and got inside as fast as possible. As I backed out of the driveway, I made the mistake of looking up at the house one last time. In that window of the room at the end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette. Surely that same person I saw standing in that room just before. That was the last thing I ever saw of Scott's house. After that weekend, he stopped responding to texts. I threatened to call in a wellness check when I got worried that he got murdered or something. And finally, he responded saying, "I'm fine." That's it, though. He didn't respond to any further texts, so I stopped bothering. That was not the same Scott I knew from school. Whatever happened to him, and whoever that was in his house, it's not my problem. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't terrify the out of me, though.